kayaaní takat Johan. Gulchish wuchin khasati ya. Where ash kulchita Sunday it achtuye ke ya ke hayati. Kat anach away kainach achyeti wullaku. Gwallt khoni aya du jit away nuke du tuyeti. Hechwasakuqa schoon a detki schoon. Yewa achtuasaku ya preschool gled khakinach hayukatangwa schoon wasa schoon yadi like schoon kuti yewa. Aqa elementary school achtuasaku yugachtusa schoon yadi. Middle school ḳuhá schoon katsku. High school ḳuhá schoon. College, university, schoon plain. Yeowe. Ololo Hawaii hastsu. Kula nui. Kula li'i. Washi. Schoon ḳuhá schoon yedi. Atlain ni hastu chucheyeti. Chosatin one means Gyal the cut Atlain adatki ya hastu jin. Kanachoy hastu tlakade, hastu tlutude. Aka we ni the cut yech aya ye has auseni. Heshwasa kwati ḳuhá heshwasa khatuti. Ya achtu yeke yoxatini. Tak itit ḳuhá ya Naski nachawe wutusaku yak yikt sheet kade haskukwa kuch qaq aya ya kone yanda tluk we ya qaq aya qeka shingitat khai atlen qu hasutu yeketa gulchi shekh ayeti iltakat Johan yitu agesaku shingit khinach yuqetani qaqwati. Okay. Gulchish we likudzi linuks. Aka aya akaushikhet hechwasaku. Wasa adut litzin akach kadujihit we linuksi at likudzi. Okay. So let's see. What if I said on Thursday bring a couple of sentences that talk about seasons. Ykhuhá. So that when after I talk and I say, I guess if you want to talk, guk, then you'll have something to say. And I'll talk about seasons. Let's see. I was talking about a number of things. It's the week after basketball week, and some people got sick. One of our kids was sick last night. She was throwing up all night. And but she seems fine now. And at school, a lot of sickness just goes around in schools. And kids, they just put their hands in their mouths and their fingers in their nose. I know adults probably do too, right? Kids is like all the time. And so there's a lot of sickness that goes around. But what else was I saying? Oh, and it's springtime, and the herring are spawning. Yan qunne yan datlukh wayao qa qukwakuch. So I got some friends who are going to Sitka for the herring harvest. That's really exciting. Kayaaní Dísi jin katka kejin ya ǩuhí aadé qukwakushit kade aqa away wayao kach. I'll go over there on April 15th. Well, I'll go on the 14th for the Yao Ku'ik, which is on the 15th. So it's exciting. Let's see. Anything to share? Any thoughts, questions? Okay. Well, I thought so. We're looking at this Taanáx story. We're moving through it. We ended up here, Gweish 2 day. I don't know how many sentences in we are. I found a retype of it, which I'll show you, because one of the projects that some former students and I have been working on, and just some language scholars in general, is retyping some of these stories. And in some of the retypes, we might find like a few missed words, right? And then in the first story in Hashuka, so if you look at Hashuka, we'll take a look at that. This amazing, incredible text, created by Nora Marks Downhauer and Richard Downhauer, whose Tlingit names are Kayaaní and ḵuhá. Like, this was an absolute landmark project. It's just incredible. It's an amazing book. It's huge. And I think, let's see, let me see if I have a scanned version of this other one. We'll do a little history lesson if I've got it. I might. Yeah, so this goes back, I think, to here. So this is maybe sort of an origin point of this. So this story is called ḵuhá Shawat. And that translates as bear husband. If you look in Hashuka, they translate it as the woman who married a bear. But the actual literal translation of this title is the woman who said something that offended the bears. And this is Yesh Nawu. His name is Tom Peters. And it's from Teslin. And I don't know if I told you, did I tell you guys the history of this story at all? The stuff that I know about? Okay, no one said I did, so I'm going to tell you again if I did. So this goes back, oh gee. So this publication, let's see if there's a date on it, 1972. So there had been quite a bit of recording of Tlingit up until this time. There's some wax cylinder recordings that go back to 1899. I think some of the oldest, like, usable, because those wax cylinder recordings are very hard to listen to because there's so much noise in them. But I think the most useful recordings of Tlingit come in the 1950s with Frederica de Laguna, who went to Angoon and went to Yakdat and made a bunch of stuff. And so if you all are interested, I'll put a link on our class page tonight to the De Laguna folder. Because when Frederica de Laguna passed away, I think it was in her will to give everything back to the Tlingit peoples. So the originals went back to Angoon and to Yakutat, and copies of the recordings were given to the university, Sealaska Heritage Institute. And so we have, I think, everything, all the audio and all the field notes from Frederica de Laguna. And it's incredible stuff, like very high quality stuff. She recorded on a little spool of wire. I have no idea how it works. I saw the wire in Philadelphia. But then after Frederica de Laguna, I think the next sets of recordings were made by Constance Nash and Gillian Story, who made the Tlingit Verb Dictionary. So the Tlingit Verb Dictionary, I think, is their monumental achievement. And so really documenting the language and how it works. And I highly recommend, even though we might look at things a little differently today, I would recommend reading the introduction to part one and the introduction to part two, and also the appendix where they talk about how Tlingit works as a language. I think they got a lot of stuff right, and there's a lot of stuff that's missing, but we've filled in a lot since then. Uh, but this just also just is an incredible document to have probably 90% of the verbs documented in a single book in ways that make them pretty usable. There's a few things that we would write now that make them more usable. Um, but they recorded a lot in Angoon, especially with Robert Zuboff. They recorded a lot with Robert Zuboff. And so then you get to, and that's in the 1960s. So you got De Laguna in the 50s, Nation Story in the 60s. In the 1970s, though, you have Tlingit peoples who get these Ampex recorders, or Ampeg, I can't remember what they're called, but they're these reel-to-reel recorders. And Nora Dowenhauer had one, Johnny Marks had one, Rosita Worrell had one, and Forrest DeWitt had one. And probably other folks did too, but those are the ones who probably recorded the most. Rosita Worrell recorded Jessie Dalton, Na Tla, and her incredible speech. And Nora and Richard recorded a whole bunch. They made probably 500 different tapes, maybe 450. And then they also added the Nation Story collection to their collection. Then you have Jeff Lear, who started recording stuff with Elizabeth Nyman especially. And then you have quite a few others who follow after that who've recorded a lot of stuff. There's a bunch of stuff that came out of Yakutat. There's a bunch of stuff that came out of, some stuff that came out of Ketchikan. Jock Alice Taff had this big project in the early 2000s documenting Tlingit conversation. I started documenting speakers in 2011. And then that's kind of the history of it. But if we go back to this text, at this point, no one had ever recorded a Tlingit story, written down the Tlingit, and then translated it into English. So this was, I think, the very first time, from my understanding, where a line-by-line translation was done, or transcription and translation, was with Jessie Dalton's speech. Nora Dowenhauer was working on it when she was attending Alaska Methodist University in Anchorage, where she met Richard Dowenhauer, and they worked on it together. She thought she couldn't do it. She was also very scared of Jessie Dalton, and she wanted to get it right. And so that was one of the first things I think that was really written completely. And then they had the idea of trying this with stories. So they went to, from Juneau to Skagway. They recorded my great-grandfather Bert Dennis a couple times. And then they went to Teslin and they recorded Tom Peters telling the story. And so he told this story and they recorded it. It ended with these two songs. They came back to Juneau, worked on it for a year, listened, and we've got programs like Elon where we can just highlight things and hit the space bar. And it's a lot of work, but it's not playing a tape, rewinding the tape, playing the tape, rewinding the tape, which they were doing at this time. And also like working on, I don't know, reel to reel, so you still got to rewind. And so they spend a year working on it. They go back to Teslin and they sit down with him and they say, well, we want to read you this story and see if we got it right. And so Richard Dowenhauer read it to him, and Richard Dowenhauer was not a Tlingit person. At that time, non-Tlingit people did not speak Tlingit. I think Nation Story did, but it was so unusual that I heard when they went to Saxman, and they're like, oh yeah, so-and-so speaks, you should go visit with her. And they knocked on her door and opened the door, and they spoke to her in Tlingit, and she slammed the door in their face. Why do you think she did that? Any guesses? Give me a guess. I can't talk the whole time.
You said it before, I think, that she thought that they were spirits or ghosts or something.
Yeah, oh, well, she thought they were ghosts, and because white people did not speak Tlingit at that time. There was a shopkeeper uh, in Juneau who spoke Tlingit, and when Elizabeth Nyman was young, it's like he's a legend because there were so few of them. Like we could count them, we know who they are. And when Elizabeth Nyman, uh, and I don't know when she was born. Do you know when she was born? Probably early 1900s. It must, because I learned from her daughter, who was an elder in the early 2000s, right? Anyways, um, so the shopkeeper used to talk to Elizabeth Nyman's parents and say, "Bring your daughter over here. She speaks really good Tlingit. I like speaking with her." And like that's a legendary status among Tlingit peoples because people just did not learn our language and hadn't up until sort of pretty modern times, right? So Richard Dowenhauer reads this story to him, and Tom, when he gets done, he says, "I didn't know you speak Tlingit like that." And he said, "No, this is not me. It's you. We recorded what you said, and we wrote it down, and we're just trying to see if we got it right." And he said, "That's a great story. Let me tell you how it ends." Because he got to the songs, and I think he got maybe excited, and he forgot to finish the story. So he told him the end of the story. And so, like, but when you go through this, like, so then they have these little books that were published. And if you go through, this is by a group called Tlingit Readers and with the Alaska Native Language Center. And, they're typing this stuff out. So when you go and look at it, it's a lot of work that goes into here. Dachnaksha awe wushkikiyen you are at wudua ini ye. Zisk a wudua ini ye. Kliqa awa aadé awa art. Two women who were siblings. They were out to their um, through a berry picking place, and there was a moose, and they were going for moose meat. Oh, is that a? No, that's a berry picking place. Okay. Anyways, and so, but it's not translated, right? So let me check the chat. Yes, they had to use typewriters, and I think like if you go in, it's probably like there's no underlying character, right? So I think you're gonna type an X and then backspace and then type a underline, right? Is that how typewriters work? I mean, I use typewriters, but I didn't use typewriters that were from the 1970s. If you look at other materials that are coming out at this time, you can see handwritten underlines and tone marks on there. So they were able to get the tone marks on here. I'm sure like there's one by hand, right? So you go through this thing and you'd see like an incredible amount of labor to do this. Like, and the typewriting part is easy. Like the listening to the thing and writing it down and then the translating it, especially because no one had done that before. Like that's just incredible. It's just amazing. We have to sort of like, I'll give you an exercise to just try this stuff and then just to see how incredibly hard it is. And Cheat Woo has done this stuff, and I've done this stuff. And if you can do 5 minutes in an hour, you're lightning fast. Like that's incredible. It's exhausting. I work with these two incredibly brilliant, very high level speakers who are in their 90s and would work for an hour and would get, maybe 10 minutes, but would be so tired they would just go take naps because it's a lot of work to do that stuff. Uh, so that leads us to Hashuka. So when Hashuka comes out, now they've got a collection of these. So sponsored by Sea Alaska Heritage Institute, getting like plenty of these stories. But if you go through, there's a lengthy and incredible introduction to here, and then you get into the narrative. So here's the first one, Basket Bay, and it says, right here, Natskla and Shachuka. They recorded it, and they gave the tapes to Nora and Richard Dowenhauer. But if you go through and you listen to this recording, which I'll put a link up to the recording on our class website as well. I was just sort of doing a thing. I was like, it'd be kind of fun to type this up and to have like a retype of it. But when I listened to it, it was actually two different recordings, which you couldn't tell. So if you go through here, the other thing is one page is Tlingit, one page is English, right? So as you go through, and so you would say, okay, here's this, and you would, so it looks like if I do 2 pages. So then you would basically, you can read across, right? So here's Kayaaní ayu, this land of our, or that land of ours. Kayaaní, that land of ours. Ayu do a sock. It's called kuk. And you can just sort of go back and forth, but you got to flip the pages over and stuff. And so nowadays we're trying to sort of line them up just side by side in columns. So I went through and you can't, and so let's see if I can find, if I remember where it is. When you go through, I think maybe it's here. Shugunach adeyu at kawdujixidi. That's where the second recording stops. And it's not, I don't think these two recordings were, because when I listened to them, I don't think it was like, hey, let's take a break and pick it back up after this. Like they were totally different recordings and they are actually totally different topics. And so it was fun to sort of go through and listen to it. So what we're doing with ḵuhá is we're listening to it and we're sort of doing one chunk at a time, right? So that's what we've been doing to help us put together some of this grammar stuff, right? Because we go hardcore on the grammar and we start figuring out how verbs work and everything. And I think it helps unlock the language, but I also think it gets people really. We were doing it one time with an elder in the room. His name is Kakake Norman James, and he said, "Chu oya achtundatani kamnekhisaqay." He says, my mind got tangled up in a seine net because it does. It's a little confusing sometimes. So
I'm sorry. Turn this off.
Khati Achka. Can you hear me now?
It's my fault. I'll turn off.
Okay, that's okay. Okay. So we had a little audio malfunction, but I was taking the class in 2007. That's the last Tlingit class I took, which was with Nora and Richard. And we would listen to recordings and we would transcribe and we did the Battle of Sitka. We did Raven defeats his uncle. And it was really fun. But what was wild is like they would take out a telephone and they would call into a number and everybody would call into this 800 number and you would do this over the phone. And so once I started teaching in 2011, I thought there's got to be a better way to do it, because everyone's on like a telephone, especially like a speakerphone. And even though the speakerphone systems were starting to get a little bit fancier, I just thought there's got to be a way to sort of just tie it all in and really improve the audio quality because people couldn't really hear you do a sock. They couldn't hear that there was like a little breath of air at the end. And it was hard to hear the difference between sounds. And it's hard to hear those even if you're just sitting in the same room. So then we started sort of trying to experiment with different microphone setups, and we went from Blackboard to Google Hangouts to Adobe Connect, and then to Zoom when Zoom came out. And I remember one time, sometimes we would get these echo feedbacks like we just got now. And one time, Chi Wu called in and started laughing because like there was an echo And we were just trying to figure out the echo, and we couldn't get the echo figured out. And once he started laughing, then he's got kind of a big booming laugh, and it just started echoing, and it was just, we were stuck in the cavern. It was very fun. But back to what we're doing. So let's talk, like, so one step further from sort of looking at this. So like basically our process, I'll back up a sentence, is we will, let me share them. I don't know if this is, hopefully the sound works. I was having sound problems. Let me know if you folks can hear this.
Wasn't the two ya kaya ḵuhá.
Can you hear it? Okay.
Aadé ḥawsitawa ya dako. Ķekwél tūde. Wasn't the two ya kaya ḥuhá. Aadé ḥawsitawa ya dako. Ķekwél tūde.
So this project also goes back to 2007. So I was talking with Richard Dowenhauer and Alice Taff, and they said, wouldn't it be great if we had some way to move through a story and look at all the parts, and because they were wanting to build glossaries out of every story, and we talked about how to do that. We tried a few different things, and then I started using these slideshows and trying. There's probably 7 different versions of this before I settled on this one. And basically what I did is I took the audio for the story, which is about 5 minutes long, and just found every single sentence and have been cutting the sentences and putting them into this slideshow. But the idea is it would say a sentence, give you about enough time to say it yourself, then he says it again, and then you have about enough time to say it yourself. And then you go to the next page, and then you see the text here, and then you can read it. Wasa du tuuya kewa kusaha kwan, adak ausatawa yadak klegwesh tude. And so, but you also see it doesn't really go, there's one sentence and half a sentence. So as I went through the audio, I would just find where these breaks were, because he does take like a pause. And so I'm still messing around with it. And then you go through and start pulling it apart, and sort of like the top line starts to color code. So we're using, hold on. This kind of gold color for a possessive or relational pronoun. We're using purple for a classifier. We're using brown for a verb root. And then when you go down, so this is just written as it was, just adding colors to start spotting these things. Then underneath that is the segment where we say, okay, wa, sa, do. You could perhaps do tu, like you could put it like that. And then the verb is the part especially where we start to say, that's a third person object, that is classifier, and then that is a, the verb root. So it's starting to sort of put it into its different components, and then underneath that is just sort of saying like the literal translation of these different parts. But this is not a full, so this process is called segmenting and glossing. So this is the gloss, but this is what I would consider like a pretty loose gloss. So you'd say how they feel good. So it's just sort of saying like, here's how these parts generally work. But if you did a bit of a tighter gloss, then you might go, how, name it, and then you'd say they, and that'd say third person, singular, possessive, and then inside, at, and then you'd have, get to the verb, and you'd have them, period, third person object, classifier, 0 plus I, and then the verb root, good. So this would be what I would consider like a bit of a tighter, like a more like item by item gloss. But I think for this exercise, we're not really doing that. We're just sort of seeing generally how these things work. Because if you start doing this, then you kind of got to start using tabs or tables so that they can line up. You'd want name to be under here. You'd want they to be right under here. Inside to be right. And so you got to figure that out. But these exercises, the idea here is you're getting whole language from the speaker. You're trying to repeat what the speaker says. And then you're going through and pulling these things apart to see how they're working. So Janine sent me something very cool, and I thought we should look at it. So she started a glossary for this story, just sort of going through and you want to just you want to walk us through it?
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so Hatu Inaguyis has a glossary and Hashuka doesn't. And I just got inspired by a number of things. Thinking a short glossary specific to a text would really help me understand what I'm reading better, so I could single out vocabulary and focus on it and try to memorize it as I try to read. And it just, yeah, I've used glossaries in other language study, but had to do some adjustments specific to Tlingit. And I also wanted to kind of see how many words are in here. How many words do I need to learn to really know this story? And I think there's almost 150. Yeah, so I ended up using slide numbers so I could reference the slide, and I didn't want to repeat entries. There might be one or two that are repeated, but to try to train myself to memorize a word and then remember it a few minutes later. I'm like, oh, I should know that word because I saw it sooner in the text. When you get down a few lines and it shows up again, I'm like, oh, what was that word again? But yeah, but doing this with Tlingit was really interesting because there are so many parts. And yeah, I hope does anyone have any questions? I hope it makes sense, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer anything.
What do y'all think?
I think this is a wonderful idea and a great accomplishment. My gosh, it's so great that you've done this. And not only that, I'm sure it's super helpful for you to go through and break it apart and match what it means and everything that you have here. I think it's great. I think you can keep moving on to all the other books too after this if you want to, and really be super helpful for so many people, I think, that would do exactly the same thing that you're doing and thinking of like, gosh, how do I kind of get in and pick apart these things and make a little more sense. I think that's great. One of the things that is a little challenging for me sometimes is reading the book like the Hashuka or some of the other ones where it takes the meaning and Kune said it before. You said that when Richard and Nora put these books together, they were kind of romanticizing. Not on maybe that's not the word they were kind of like I don't know, that's not the right word, but they spun the English around a little bit to make it sound more, I guess, I don't know, what's the word you used?
Yeah, well, their goal was to elevate Tlingit
Elevate.
literature to say like this is as the same quality as any literature around the world. And so because that was part of their intention was to prove to schools that they shouldn't stop looking at this stuff after elementary school. And they say like this is just as high quality as any literature from anywhere in the universe. And so they would they would make pretty like, and they wouldn't change it, but they would just sort of say, let's make it sound really good in English, like English literature would sound. And so yeah, they would they would make some pretty poetic decisions in terms of how to lay stuff out and how to translate them, which was,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's wonderful to read it and interpret it that way. But as a learner, sometimes it's difficult for me to say, okay, this is what it's lined up in Tlingit, and then it kind of changes, throughout the story. Sometimes the same word or the same phrase or something kind of changes meaning in their English interpretation of it. So it doesn't have as much of a solid base, I guess, because the base sometimes shifts around or changes based off of the way that they're interpreting the English. And so anyway, sometimes that's a little tricky for me to kind of go back and forth, and it's not as clean and clear cut as this is what it's saying, and this is actually kind of what it means. And then you leave it open for interpretation for the reader or the learner, I guess, to rearrange it in a way that makes more sense in English versus having that done by somebody else, I guess.
Yeah, wow. You okay?
Yes, Yadi, glossaries. I think that's a really excellent point, that the interpretation is up to the reader, the language student, the person who's trying to read the text in the language. And Ḥuhá, you had mentioned that the Downhowers wanted to put this on a level with Beowulf.
Mhm.
And that's actually one of the things that inspired me. Is years ago, I studied not Anglo-Saxon, but Latin, and just coming up with my own translations of Latin text with the help of a glossary and lots of grammar notes. But it changes. It can change. There's several ways to say something in English, and when you're switching from one language to another. So yeah, I think it's important to have the tools you need to, and of course we have dictionaries, but the quick reference version, I think, speeds things up a bit. And it's like you said, Yadi, it's great for practice, just to write this up.
Yeah, and so like for a glossary, you can have basically what I could see is two kind of basic methods. And one method is like sort of like this, which is going enter things as you're encountering them, right? So like here's where we encounter it in the story. And then the second kind would be alphabetical, right? So I would say this one first, and then you could do an alphabetical one if you want to. And so a couple of things, like this is brilliant, this is wonderful, this is amazing work. It's showing like a lot of understanding of the language. There are some areas where I'd say like if you're gonna have yay and do a sock, the yay needs to go with the do a sock. And this is stuff where it just gets identifying which one's a preverb and which one is just something different. But it's a preverb when if you remove it, now the verb changes, or the verb says, you can't take that away from me. You need the yay or the you for the do a sock verb. And so that's one. And so as we go through, like I'd probably just go through and grab some stuff and just cut it and then put it down here and put it with the verb. And that's totally fine. And then other parts, if it says ḵat wuxuch, like you got to have the ḳat there because that is the object. And so, because this will help us to sort of see these things in action because we're learning them as like this very artificial process, like ḳat, moving through these. But then as we start to see them, we could sort of go through, and especially because the story goes by very quickly. Like if you just hit play for the whole story, in 5 minutes, like an incredible amount of amazing language goes into your ears, right? And so the other part is I kind of added, I would recommend calling this the gloss, just because that's the process, and so that we've got just sort of a way to sort of talk about it. Or you could call it the segmenting, whatever. Well, that's actually a segment. When you show the actual parts, right? So I
I thought code was fun. That's okay though.
Well, you could put segment in parentheses, right? And then I added one category to just mark the verb root. And you could go in here, you get a little fancier if you want to. Some of these, you'd have kuch number 1, you'd have sa number 1, But you could just start with just sa, na. And then I made a column for the classifier. So this is the way we just noted, right? So this is an S group classifier. So basically, if the classifier was Z, right? So if you say audzegewu, right, would be they were saying. So if I'll just write it here, right? So as an example, audzegewu. So then the classifier would be Z, right? Which we're not going to isolate here. But the way we would note that is there is the D in there, it's an S group, and there is the I. So that's how we write it. But otherwise, D comma S means there's the D in there, but there's no I. So it's a order thing. The middle one will always be there. It's an S group, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, S group. This one is plus D. This one is plus I, plus I, plus I, plus I. So that's how we've gone to writing. And the reason why we write it in this order is because if you see Z, you have D, that's the first sound, S is the second sound, I is the third sound. So it's just putting them in the order that you see them. So there will always be the middle one, and then you would put the D comma in front of it if the D is present in the classifier, and you'd put the I if the I is present in the classifier. But that's just one. I'm adding steps, which I don't know if you let me in, I'm gonna add to it.
I did want to keep it simple, but we can add, especially as, you know, as my own understanding and comfort level increases, I think adding is okay. But yeah, I felt like I had to just start with, I didn't even know how this would end up when I started. And a little tip on alphabetizing, one nice thing, I'm so glad to not have typewriters anymore, because on Google Sheet, you can sort pretty easily, as some of you probably know. If you select the entire sheet and then go to data, and then you can sort by column.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I did that just to double check, see if I triple enteried anything, and also just to see what words are there in English alphabetical order. And then I put it back to the slide order.
Well, yeah, because the other thing you can do is this is all vocab, and you should be able to click here or just click here and select duplicate, and then I could change the name of this one to Tlingit alphabetical, and now I could change this one, and it doesn't change this other one, right? So and then I can make one for you can do whatever you want, right?
Right.
But if you wanted to do that, then you can, especially once it was done, once you figured it was done, then you could have these different sort of versions of it to say, oh yeah, because this really helps us with a lot of stuff too. And if you did one, like the benefit of also like if we're looking for things to do, to put every single word that's in there as its own cell, then you could sort of sort them and count them. And you could also say, what's the most commonly used word in this story? Which is it's going to be away. That's just to give it all away. That's the most common word in Tlingit by far. But that's because it's used all the time for a whole bunch of stuff, right? It's like used for a comma a lot of times, basically.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, folks?
I'm curious what an iterative suffix is, but that's all I got.
The name of a suffix where it happens again, where the suffix means that it happens over again. I found that in Crippen.
Yeah, and so there's lots of levels to this stuff too. And so I like this. It's a good intermediate level thing where we're not trying to define every single part. We're just saying, here's what this thing means. Here's what it does. I like putting these two over there because then we could place, all we're playing right now is spot the root and spot the classifier. Just so you can see, because I think if you start noting it, I'm not asking you to say, tell me what it is and what it does. I'm just saying, find it. Right? Okay, this is, so if we go down to the next verb, down here, wuti is a 0 group plus I classifier. Sati yidach is an S group classifier. Right? So we can go through and we start learning how to spot these. And just like noting them helps our brain to see, oh yeah, okay, I do see what it does. This is sa. Well, it's si if we're talking about it happened. Otherwise, it's going to be sa. And then we get one L one right there, right? So that one, if we go back over, if we go over to here, we're going to go want, and we're going to go L comma I, because the I is there.
That's
Awesome.
helpful. Oh, one other thought on the part of speech. I found that interesting to sort as well and just see how many different ways did I write verb plus something else and maybe try to, find a consistent way to describe words and just to see how many verbs there are or how many nouns there are or how many directional terms are used in this text and just reduce the amount of times I have to look stuff up in a dictionary and just see it in context, see it on a short list, and just try to internalize it.
Okay. Yeah, well, Yanastini, that one's interesting because it does. So what you have is okay, we're gonna have to go to the notes for this one because it's gotta be a little bigger. Hold on. And just sort of seeing how this stuff, the fun part about Tlingit is it can always be more complicated. It's like, we can make this as complicated as you want to. Like, sky's the limit. Raven's way up there flying around, right? So, Yanastini, right? To look at this as a verb, we have to have this come out, right? So this is what he says. But we don't need we could say, we could switch this to yadak because he does use that, right? So that we keep a Tlingit word in there. Yadak yanastini. And as far as understanding how does this verb work, the first thing I would say is, can we get this, if we get this to a familiar form, it's going to be this. Yadaqsiti. So this is, they are a young man. Okay. So that's how it works. So this is the noun. This is a suffix that says this is what the group is, and then sati says to be one of those things. And the thing is always marked by this, right? So for example, you'll see sentences like ha-at-chayi, ha-kawdujixidi. Where if you said that the other way around, you could, but it would probably be not what you intended to say. How would we interpret this first one? Ha-at-chayi, ha-kawdujixidi.
Our food is our way of life.
Our food is our way of life. And if we said ha-kosti, ha-at-chayichsati.
Our way of life is our food.
Mm-hmm. And right, that's a little bit of a puzzling, like, I don't know, that might not make sense. Like, we're going to eat our culture. No, right? But that's just saying, like, word order matters, and wherever you put this thing is important, right? So here we have yadaqsati. They are a young man. So we can also, this verb is interesting because when we move it into a perfective, it doesn't change a whole lot. We add w in front of it, and then you would say they became a young man. It's slightly different. Like the meaning is like instead of like saying they are, we're talking about this moment where they became a young man, or the fact that it did happen. And then we can put it into the future if we want to. Yadaqsati, they will become a young man. And the young man part we could put any noun we want to in there. Like they could say tlingit, they could say ḳuhá. So what we have here is, anybody know what this yana thing does? Have we seen that before?
Yana Gut. Let's see, what else? Yana Sheikh, Yana. Other.
Yeah, on a squeam. And so there are some verbs that have this. Oh, here, we got to put this one. Yeah, on a quat. Okay. And as far as what these mean, or how we interpret them, right? So they all have this, like, it's happening right now. So they are walking, they are running. And this is very similar, like when we think about walking and running. So in English, you have to have that ing on there, right? So like reading, walking, running. So that's a very similar mechanism to what's going on with this yana. It's like in the process of happening. Ya anasqueen, they are getting to know it. Anybody know what ya anaquat is?
They're rolling?
No, that would be ya ana. That would be ya anaquat.
Oh,
No underline and also no ejective.
oh, yeah.
Fart?
Yeah, they are going along farting. Which is, I won't say which uncle, but one time this very prestigious uncle of mine was walking towards me, and I was like, "Oh, he's gonna come visit with me." And I was like, "Hey, how are you doing?" He says, "Oh, well, I was standing over by those ladies, and I had to fart, so I walked over here so I could, let some go on the way." And I was like, "All right, I'm glad you headed my direction. Anyways, let's visit." But so one of the things with, like, let's look at ya anasqueen, right? So when we have ya anasqueen, we can also say ausaku. This is the same verb in a different mode, which is they know it. And so what happens when you put ya na is one of the rules with the ya na is you cannot leave that verb root open. So that's why you have to close it with the letter N. So now we go back way down here. Yadaqsati, yadaqwusati, yadaqquxati. I gotta make this one a little smaller. Everybody fit on one line already. So now we can say yadaq yanasteen. They are becoming a young man. So you can basically, you would be saying this about someone this would be a phrase for a boy who is actively going through puberty right now. Like that is literally what you would be talking about. So you're putting it in a very specific time frame. Like it's going through this change right now. So Yanestine, you have to have this. So then, there's more. So what this I does is this is very similar to a different suffix that you could put onto a verb. But this one must always stay low, and we call it the attributive suffix because it turns a verb into an adjective. So you could say, Yidaq yanastini ah, the ones who are becoming young men right now. Right? So it turns the whole verb into an adjective. And so that's why you have that on there. But again, all this shows us is like, we can just take a small look at these verbs, and a small look at all this vocabulary, and then we could just keep diving in. Like you can always come back to these stories and keep pulling more as you learn more and more about how all this stuff works.
Ḥuhné. One more thought I wanted to mention is that your color coding make drafting a glossary much, much easier. It was more of an organizational task rather than try to figure everything out on the spot task.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just wondering going forward, is color coding of our own something you'd recommend at this point? I mean, I'm sure it's a lot of work for you. Is that something that, we could start practicing for our own benefit, or collaborating, doing it together on a text or something of that nature?
Yeah, that's a great idea. So a couple of things, like if we come, like let's go back to, where is that? Let's go back to Hashika, and then we'll take our break. So, for example, here's a story, Duktut. Incredible story, amazing stuff. And if we go in, we're going to zoom in here. So, you we henya away, ye do wasak away, do uchkun tauk ani. So, we can and should retype all of these stories. Now, there's going to be a bit of a duplication of effort sometimes because some people have already done this. But if we wanted to do this, like we could start a slideshow, and or we could. There's a bunch of different places you could start. For example, retyping. So if you retype this, what I would recommend for starters is start a Word or Pages document. And so basically, let's see, how do I want to do this? Oh, I'll just show you how I would go about doing this. So I would start, okay. I am going to share my whole screen, and we'll just see how that works out for me. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. So basically, here is a document. I would start with a blank document. I like to work in Pages, and I would say table. We only need, for now, 2 columns. You can put 3 if you want to, and the third column would be for the little number thing. So then I would go, like, here's the story. So I would have the story on half of the screen, and I would have my document. Oops, not that one. That's where I'm going to get in trouble. I got a million things open. Okay, you close. Okay, there it is. So now here's Hashuka. Here's my document. And I would set this up, but I'd have a lot more room because I wouldn't be zooming at the same time. But I would go through here, and every cell. So this is where, like, I don't know if we even need the line numbers at this point. We're going to have to renumber this thing, I think. Because my suggestion is to say you, we, henya, awe, ye, do wasak, awe. But I don't know, maybe we just go line by line like they do. I don't know. I go back and forth on this stuff. So then I would just be retyping this whole thing. And you do a sock away, do uch. And I think it ends with, okay, talk ani. So then you get to talk ani. So then you could go through, and this is where we have decisions to make, right? Like in terms of, I respect the Daumenhauer's work, I love them, I worked with them for almost half of my life, right? But their work is still there. If we sort of decide to do this differently, it's not going to hurt anybody. So now we could say that over there, that is henya, which we can say, it's up to us if we want to add something, add any details in there. Henya is the name of the Tlingit peoples of the southern part of Prince of Wales. And then Yetu Asaka Wetu Ukh. That is what it is called. People use it. And then I would say Tauk Ani, and then in parentheses I might put Winter Village, comma, Metlakatla, or Annette Island, whatever, it's. And so if we wanted to translate it that way, So then going through, like we would go through all of this stuff, but then as far as what we did next, I would probably, this is where it gets a little interesting. So for me, I would now start a new Keynote document, and I'd have to do a lot more setup for this than I'm going to do right now. But then I would enter the text, and I would go back, and I would go, here's the first part, and this is where it would all be one. Every slide I would recommend be one sentence. So now you can go in and you can format this. I like Brill. Let's make it black, and there's like 60, right? And like this. But then we also have to come back to this and probably capitalize, I didn't do that, and put the period there. So now that we have it, I have a slide. I can duplicate this slide, and this is where I can do for this one, I might well, that goes like, now. This is where I would probably come in and start, like make this green, make this red, make this purple, make this brown, and then whatever, you know, I'd have to probably come back to this one, and I could copy this and paste it into, oops, paste it there, and now I've got all my colors. And so what I would do is when I was coming through here, is I could highlight de, and I can get this little text color thing, and then there's an eyedropper, and I could say, well, that's a subject pronoun, and those are red. And then I could go, well, this is a classifier, and these are purple. So you can go through and do that, right? And then you can, to put the other thing underneath it, then if I were to do that, like I would get these all the right color, and then I would copy this, I'd hit enter, and I would probably make it smaller. And then this is where I would go and then change that to this, and then change that to this, change that, and go. Oh, and you gotta add this here. But you know, I think you got to start thinking about what are the invisibles that are there, and then what are the suffixes. But it does, you know, if you wanted to do this as an exercise, you certainly could. I think ţankha is the only one in 2007, in 16 years, I have gotten close to finishing one story. So you could do ḳaq, ḳaqachguk, natsishane, like any of those. You could take any of these that you wanted to and do this as an exercise, which is, I don't know, that could be your final if you wanted to. Okay, we better take a break. We'll pause and we'll come back at 10 till. Okay, we're back. Something that came up on the break was putting suffixes onto things. I want to talk about suffixes for a second, and then we're going to get into, I think, a couple of translation exercises, and then we can decide whether we want to look at that intro to verbs again or get back into the ṭankha story. But we did sort of start looking at this document, which is Jeff Lear's verb notes, handwritten in cursive on a legal pad and scanned as a gigantic document. This is a huge document. This is the one that would crash the programs that I would use. So I always have to open this in Adobe Acrobat, because if I use like preview, it always crashes. It just does. But there is, thanks to ḵuhá Colleen Bunn, there is a typed version of this. And I'll show you what it looks like, and I'll put a link to it so that you folks can see it. And we are, well, this version is a little different than what you might see. So here it shows you some different things on here in terms of some notes on how to read this. And then when you go through, it has everything typed for you. It's amazing. And so it has the entry, the definition, and then notes over here. In case you're wondering, if you see this N in parentheses, that's telling you na conjugation, right? So G would be ga, underline G would be qa. I don't, and then a 0 would be 0 conjugation. And so as you go through, like this is a beautiful document because now it's searchable. So if I was looking for just ḵuhá, then I could find it, right? And so I can also do searches for other things like right. And then, I guess, okay. Oh, and here's this, we were just looking for this thing there. Ugh. This form has 2 suffixes on it, and I'll try and figure out why. I'll see if somebody.
I think that second one is located there.
Oh, okay.
I'm remembering it now, but I
Okay.
think that's repetitively there.
Repetitively at there, because yeah, clothing, right? I'm putting it on there. Okay. Anyways, you okay? Sheesh. Okay. What did I say we're gonna do? Oh, some translation stuff. This will be fun. Okay, so getting us out of like just talking about Tlingit and listening to it. Why don't you folks take a couple of minutes and translate this sentence into Tlingit? A singular they gave a singular them the ball or a ball. It doesn't matter. Tlingit doesn't use articles, so whether you use a or the, it doesn't matter. Okay, so I'll pause the recording and give you a couple minutes to see what you come up with. Okay. Anybody want to come tell us what you came up with? Or you put it in the chat too. Oh, yes, going back to the question in the chat. The typed version of that, those verb notes, I will put on our class webpage. I think tonight. After my hockey game. Okay, anybody? The game of the ball.
Kune.
Ah,
I got stumped because my guess is this needs a handling verb for a spherical object, and I need more than 2 minutes to remember where to find that.
yes, okay, so let's do some work together. No problem. No pressure. So if we go into the verb dictionary and let's look at, what is it, under give? And then I gotta change the view, hold on. Okay. Okay, so we have give. Okay, here's a bunch of things for give. So we have a general object. Oh wait, there's a round object. So, but what it shows us here is future. So, achlichide kakwati wedana. Okay, that's gotta be some round money. It's gotta be like a silver dollar, maybe. Really? Round money? Okay, okay, fine. I don't know. Maybe we wad it up into a ball. Okay. So here's but now that we know what the verb is gonna be, so we see kakwati. Now we could jump over to another resource, which is the verb database, which is, someday I'll teach a class and not have 1,000 things open at the same time. There it is, okay. So now we're going to go down to the T verbs, which there's T number 1 is to be, T number 2 is to give or take, or this is the carrying verb. That's the one we want. So let's open this up. Carry it, general object. We're looking for one with ka, postpone it, that's a different one. Solid object, no ka, no ka. Oh, here it is, to hand a spherical object. I bet you I could find the answer in here. Dujixidi, give them this round thing. Maybe it's an apple. Don't give it to them. Oh, there's a progressive there, giving it to them right now. We're looking for a perfective, a kawati. So now you've got the whole thing, right? Dujit a kawati. On either side, you can put we kucheta. Dujit a kawati we kucheta. We kucheta dujit a kawati. Those are your two octopus tentacles. Dujita kawati we kucheta. Whenever we do this stuff, like we're always doing this stuff together. Always doing it together. Dujita kawati we kucheta. They gave them the ball. And so, like, as far as how we get to that, again, like, give, like, just sort of getting into the verb dictionary more and more, we just have to remember, how did they have that listed? And these handling verbs, that's give. And the handling verbs, okay, there's two things that make them complicated, okay? Thing number one is that there's all these different categories for these types of objects. A round thing, a general thing, a thing that can spill, a thing that's a container that's empty, a rope, a coiled rope, or rope-like thing, a coiled one, a rope-like thing that you grab by the end, a stick-like object, a complicated stick-like object, you know, and so there's like 16 of them, right? So item number one is like there's all these different categories because the verb tells you how to carry the thing. If it's a bundle of towels, you have to carry it differently than a single towel, right? That's the first part that makes it complicated. The second is that it's a motion verb. And the reason why motion verbs get complicated is because the type of motion will determine the conjugation type. So to hand someone this, that's a zero motion verb, right? So for example, dujit akawati, well, that would be different than they brought the basketball over there, which would be wade akawati. Now it goes low, we kucheta. Okay. Okay, kucheta. Why do I have different things here? I don't know what I'm gonna. What's the next slide? Yehoji kutin wekaya tayihushiki. Why did I put that on? I think I'm also. Whoops. Okay, never mind. Now I remember. I just showed you the answer. Okay, so I haven't looked at these slides in a long time. I think they go. What? The first sentence goes from English to Tlingit, and the second sentence goes from Tlingit to English. Did you guys see the answer? And did I read it out loud? Do you know what it is? Okay, I showed you the answer briefly, and I may have said it, but you may not have caught it because I was trying to figure out what am I doing? Okay, I know what I'm doing. Let's do this one all together. So to try and translate this sentence from Tlingit to English, Yehoji kutin wekaya kajit tayich ushihi. So I'll tell you what, like, this is a thing. Yehwaji. This is a thing. The noun. This is all a thing. Another noun with a directional term, right after it. And then this is a thing. Okay. So, to find out what this one is, does anybody know that one? And Chi Wu is too advanced. He can't answer. Got to put him on mute.
ḵuhá was like, I believe.
Yes, I believe or I suspect. So again, like if we didn't know that one, it's not a problem. We go into the verb dictionary. We go down to the part 2 to look up the root G. When we see G, we know, well, we should know ḵuhá is a zero group classifier. So this is the thing. To think so, to imagine, to suspect. So when you come back to it, you will learn that this phrase, Yehwaji, is I believe or I suspect, and then you're going to get all the way, I believe this verb, right? That's really, I'm going to link it to this second verb. What about kutzin? Do we know what kutzin is?
Wasn't that one the mouse?
Yeah, a mouse or a rat.
Hmm.
And we could go look that one up in, so if we didn't know that one, kutzin, we would switch to this dictionary. And so we could go through and we'll go down to K and then we'll scroll down. Well, I can go to KW and then scroll up. There's more K words than anything. K is by far the most, the letter with the most words. So then we go down and we go get close. Kutzin, mouse or rat. So it's right there. So then we come back to our, so when I think rat or mouse, what about kayaaní? Do we know that one?
Kayaaní, chair.
Yes. That chair, what about taayich?
Under.
Underneath, and then this is a suffix, like it is under there moving around, or it went under there repeatedly. And then that gets us to the last part, which is our second verb. So this verb is linked to this verb.
Sheikh or sheikh is run.
Yes. So if you were from Yakutat, you would say this. You'd say Yehwaji kutzin wekayakaji tayich wushhihi. You would hear that first X, hihi. All other places, as far as I know, in Tlingit, contract. This is an interesting thing. Like the front of that verb root falls off, which is interesting because if you had wujje, you would say he, wujje he. But when the vowel falls out of this classifier, you end up contracting and you end up with wushihi. This is not very common. So just know if you encounter this wushi, you might be looking at wushi. So you would go look it up, and just to keep practicing looking stuff up, we would go to he, we would go down, and what we're looking for is j. That's the classifier. Nowadays we would write D plus SH. It's to run. So again, coming back to what we're looking at, Yehwaji kutzin wekayakaji tayich wushihi. How are we going to translate that?
Maybe what their mouse is running around under the chair. Circles.
I think a mouse ran under that chair. Yeah, what? Okay. Okay. So like in terms of like putting it all together, I think a mouse ran under that chair. Okay. Okay. Keep going with this. Go back to verbs. What's the wishes of the group?
Really quick question.
Huh?
So that's a high I at the end, so it's like the opposite of the low one.
Yes. Okay. So what we have here, let me actually duplicate this. So we're gonna go and we have, if these things are separate, right? And actually we can say, we're gonna make these two totally separate sentences. So if these were two separate sentences, right? This verb would be wujihih. Kutin we kayaaní wujihih. So this as its own sentence is how you'd say a mouse ran under the chair. It happened, right? It absolutely happened. But one of the things that Tlingit does is if you want to tie this verb to that verb, and the most common ones that do this, yak'e ichsatini, gunalchish hatigudi. So you hear that little I sound on the second verb. What that's doing is tying these two verbs together. English uses like if or when or that or to. It uses some sort of linking word to tie these together. Tlingit likes to use this sort of mechanism. And what happens is the verb, this is just kind of this is an interesting thing that Tlingit does. And it's fairly predictable. So I want this all to be on one. Okay. So if we change this, so we have kutin we kayaaní wujihih. But if I wanted to say kutin we kayaaní klech, oops, it's getting complicated. Wushhih. So what we have here is now the negative perfective. The mouse did not run under the chair. So in this case, it's not about meaning, it's just about patterns. So what Tlingit likes to do is make it into basically a negative form and then add a relational suffix, which will be either an I or a U, or a YI or a WU, and the tone will be the opposite of whatever comes before it. This is how you tie two verbs together. Yak'e hatigudi. It's good that you came here. But you'd say hat iyagut. That's how you'd say you came here. But once you tie it to another verb, it goes through some changes that are predictable, but they use these sort of pattern building formulas, which in this case, and for a starting point, is you find the negative perfective of that verb or you build it, and then you put a suffix on there. It's kind of an advanced thing to do, right? But for now, I would say like kind of memorize these things. Like you start by memorizing them, but like you have used these things before, right? So you'd say hat iyagut, you came here. Klesh hat yigud. Klesh hat yigud. You didn't come here, right? So then you'd say yak'e hat, and then what we're doing is we're grabbing this, copy, paste, throw a suffix on there, it changes it to a D, and then it has to be the opposite of the tone before. Yak'e hat yigudi. It's good that you came here. There's another one. You've done this. Here's another one. So we'd say, ich sehe, I see you. Tesh ich sehe. I didn't see you, or I don't see you. Yak'e, and then copy this one. Ich sehe. So it's a pattern that we have used it, but I think we have only through memorization at this point. But in terms of like figuring out how that works, now you could yehuaji any verb you want to. Right? For example, if I said, wuta, they slept, klesh wuta, how would I get, I think they slept. It would be start with this, but you got to do something to it now.
Utaye.
Yeah, well. So you had to add ye, and it's got to be the opposite tone of what's here. Yechoji wutai. I think they slept. Right? Here's another one. Ach, eat, yitletu. You taught it to me. Kesh ach eat, yitletu. You didn't teach it to me. Gunash chish. And so we're going to copy this. Ach eat, yitletu. It's missing a part though. What's it missing?
Yeshatuwu.
Yeah, well, yitletu. It's got to go high, low, right? Gonna chish ach eat yitletu. Right? Ach eat yidashi. Kesh ach eat yidashi. Gonna chish ach eat yidashi. Right? So like this, like it's a predictable pattern. Like so just in terms of like coming back to this concept, like Tlingit has these patterns. The patterns aren't always directly tied to meaning, right? Because it's like, I don't know why it's the negative perfective. It just is. But once you learn how to put that negative perfective on there, now you can tie any two verbs together, and this using this pattern. And the most common ways is with gunachij, yak-a. But we were messing around with this, just like learning how we were being mean to each other, right? So we can go back to this, irsetin, and then klesh, irsatin. Oops. And then we're going to use this pattern. Put the I on there, and then we're going to say klesh ushke. And what does that say?
It's bad to see you.
Yeah, it's terrible to see you, right? And so we were just teasing. We're trying to figure out how to learn this pattern and be mean to each other. But we were laughing. I promise we were laughing. Maybe one of us cried later. I don't know. But just to like show you the patterns, because like when I was learning this pattern, I was like, so that's how you do it? And someone said, I think so. And so, so here would be Yannick, and then you would have Kesh this would be tlel uniku. So you could say Ishan oops. Well, I guess you could say Ianiku, and it would say Iniku, Ishan Iniku, right? It's too bad that you're sick. But when I was actually, well, when I was learning this pattern, I said, well, I want to test it out. I said, could you say Achtu yak e jin Iniku? It should have been Achtu yak e jin Uniku. And so there was an elder walking by, and she has a great sense of humor. And I said, Hanak, Achtu yak e, and she goes, Dasa. I said, Achtu yak e jin Uniku. She goes, Cha! And it's like, okay, it works. That's pattern's tested. I need to make sure that she knows I was just kidding, even though that's a very mean thing to say. But just in terms of like how to use this thing, right? There's lots of stuff you can, now you can put any two verbs you want to together. It takes a little bit of, learning how to do this, but maybe now when you talk about your sentences, you're going to share some sentences when we start class on Thursday about seasons, right? So you could, so here's something, you could say tak ite, itit, ḥuhá, and that's, whoops, that would be spring has arrived, and you could say tak itit, tlel, ḥuhá. So now you could probably put together, it's good that spring has arrived, right? Because the ant, it's given to you right here, except for it's missing one part. So again, you would cut this, so you'd say, what you would do is if you copied this, you pasted it, drop that, and you would add the suffix on there, which would be y. And when you gotta have another verb in front of it. Yak tak itit ḥuhá, right? Achtu yak ketain mutachai. I'm glad that we ate well. Right? There's so many of these. Like, you could say iwuneich. You healed, right? And this one actually, I don't think this would change. Iwuneich. Oh wait. So then you have at aadé. So here's another one that works well to tie two verbs together. Iwunechi. So this part, anybody know what this at aadé is?
I hope.
I hope, right? So now you can hope for all kinds of things. At aadé llingit to each two. I hope you study llingit. Thoughts, questions? Everybody okay? See how we do with this one. I knocked twice on the door. How are we going to find this? Let's do it together. We're going to have to pause it. What do we need to know? Somebody tell me what to go look up, and I'll go look it up. Or tell me if you know any of the words for this.
We could look up knocked.
Okay. Go to the verb dictionary and look up knock. It's verb dictionary. Go to K. Kayaaní. So here we do get the perfective, right? So we could say a kawdujixidi. And one of the things that we're going to learn to do, so if we go back to here and we copied that. Oops, that's so tiny. Hold on. Let me just grab this so I can get the format. So here's wuta. So if we have a kawagwash, there's a couple, like I could tell you now, that's a zero conjugation verb. I could also tell you if you want to go from third person to first, this is what you do. You take the off the front, and then you change this second A to an underlined X, then add another A right there. Kawagwash. I knocked on it. Now what do we need? Now I've knocked on it.
Twice. I'm not sure if it's a dechga or maybe a different.
Okay, okay.
Dach
Dachdahin, right? So yes, so dachdahin. And if we didn't know that, we could go to this dictionary, go down to the English section, and go down to T, and then, oh, it's not there. How do I not have twice in there?
You have once in there? I mean, once you can kind of derive once from twice and thrice and everything else.
I've got it under two.
Oh, okay.
I'll have to add twice someday. Okay. But you can search this dictionary. So twice there's dachdahin. Dech, and over here is dachqa, which is 2 by 2, and dachnach, which is 2 people. So we go back, and now we've got dachdahin kachwakwash. I've knocked twice on it. I think we're only missing one part.
A hot is door. So it'll probably be like way, a hot.
Yeah, well. And again, like if we didn't know door, we go to this dictionary and go down to the English section for D, scroll down, and get door, kahat. So we come back, dachdahin kachwagwash kahat. Dachdahin kahat kachwagwash. Fine. Both ways are fine. I knocked twice on it, that door. I twice door on it, knocked. Both ways are fine. Thoughts or questions? 3 minutes, I gotta shut this Zoom down. I got a hockey game at 8 o'clock. And you know what I said? I said, 8 o'clock, I'm gonna be late. And you know what my teammates said to me? Aren't you always late? I said, yeah, but if I said I'm late, that means I'm really probably gonna really be late. So for Thursday, what are you guys gonna bring? For Thursday, what do you bring? Somebody tell me.
A few sentences about the seasons.
Yes, you're gonna bring some things to say about seasons. Yak-ха-ha.
Like the weather, right?
Yeah, the weather.
Okay.
It's like becoming springtime and anything.
Like seasons as in like seasonings?
Oh, right. Oh, yeah. Oregano. I was like, wait a minute. Yes. The seasons as in fall, winter, spring, summer. Yak-ха-ha. Like seasonings, I think they should call them maybe something that smells, like you can really smell them, right? Because isn't like sense of smell really where flavor comes from? Is that true? I don't know. There's a cook among us. Washi Saku. Okay. Okay, anything else? Chish, Wukecha, Kwasatim.
Finish Shisha.
Gnashtish.
Jeez.
Sheesh.
Cheese, yeah, class.
Kecha.
Nice to see you, Cheat Woo.
You too, Etsu.
That's it.
Okay.